My name is Bianca and my brother's voice still echoes in my mind. She'll never say no at a wedding, it's the perfect moment. Little did he know, his perfect moment was about to become his worst nightmare. What happened next didn't just ruin his proposal, it destroyed his entire life. If you've ever felt the burning need for justice after someone trampled on your most precious moment, hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video because you're about to witness a masterclass in calculated revenge. And stick around, because this story proves that sometimes karma needs a little help. Let's dive in. Picture this, you're 35 years old, finally found the love of your life, and you're planning what should be the most magical day of your existence. That's exactly where I was 2 years ago when I got engaged to Michelle, the woman who changed everything about how I saw the world. But here's the thing about toxic family dynamics, they have a way of poisoning even your happiest moments. My brother Todd isn't just the baby of the family, he's been the center of our parents' universe since the day he was born. And I mean literally from day one. Todd had what doctors called a complicated birth, spending his first month fighting for life in the ICU. While I understand that must have been terrifying for my parents, what happened next shaped the toxic dynamic that would plague our family for the next 29 years. From the moment Todd came home from that hospital, he became untouchable. Every tantrum was met with immediate attention. Every demand was instantly fulfilled. Every boundary that my sister Abby or I tried to establish was steamrolled by parents who seemed to believe that their youngest son was made of glass and gold. But Todd wasn't fragile. He was calculating. Even as a child, he learned to weaponize his dramatic birth story. Whenever he wanted something, and I mean anything, he'd find a way to make it about his difficult start in life. By the time he was a teenager, Todd had mastered the art of emotional manipulation better than most adults ever do. The pattern was always the same. Family gathering. Todd would manufacture some crisis that demanded immediate attention. Someone else's birthday. Suddenly Todd would have a health scare or relationship drama that overshadowed the celebration. Graduation ceremonies, job promotions, even when our grandmother was dying, Todd somehow always managed to redirect the spotlight back to himself. Abby and I watched this happen over and over again. We'd try to talk to our parents about it, but they'd always respond with the same tired refrain, "He's been through so much, or you don't understand what it was like almost losing him." It was like our parents were stuck in some kind of time loop, forever frozen in those terrifying early weeks when Todd's survival was uncertain. The worst part wasn't just that Todd got away with this behavior, it was that he seemed to genuinely enjoy it. There was always this little smirk on his face when he successfully hijacked someone else's moment. Like he was proud of his ability to manipulate not just our parents, but entire family gatherings. By the time I reached my 30s, I'd learned to keep my distance. Abby had done the same. We'd show up for major holidays, grit our teeth through Todd's inevitable attention-seeking performances, and then escape back to our own lives. It wasn't healthy, but it was survival. Then Todd met Lucy. Lucy was 24, sweet, and unfortunately, completely unaware of what she was walking into. Todd was on his best behavior during their courtship. Charming, attentive, romantic. He proposed to her within 6 months, and she said yes with tears of joy streaming down her face. Our parents were over the moon. Finally, their precious baby boy was settling down. But old habits die hard, and Todd's true nature couldn't stay hidden forever. The first major red flag came at Abby's baby shower. Picture this, Abby had struggled with fertility issues for years. She'd had 3 miscarriages before finally carrying a pregnancy to term. This baby shower wasn't just a celebration, it was a miracle. Our mother had spent weeks planning every detail, from the decorations to the menu to the guest list. Everything was perfect. Abby was glowing, surrounded by friends and family who genuinely loved her. The gifts were thoughtful, the food was delicious, and for once, it felt like we were having a normal family gathering centered around someone other than Todd. And then Lucy stood up. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "but I have something to share with everyone." The room went quiet. Abby looked confused. And then Lucy dropped the bombshell, "Todd and I are having a baby." The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the explosion of congratulations, hugs, and excitement, all directed at Lucy and Todd, while Abby sat there looking like she'd been slapped. Later, when I confronted Todd about the timing, he just shrugged. Lucy was excited, he said. She couldn't wait to tell everyone. But I knew better. I'd seen that familiar glint in Todd's eyes when Lucy made her announcement. He'd orchestrated the whole thing, probably telling Lucy it would be more meaningful to share their news surrounded by family. He couldn't stand that for one afternoon, Abby was the center of attention. Abby never said much about it, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. Her baby shower, the celebration of her miracle, had become Todd and Lucy's announcement party. It was classic Todd, and it made me sick. But even after witnessing this, I still made the mistake of thinking I could manage Todd's behavior at my own wedding. When I proposed to Michelle, I initially wanted to elope. Just the two of us, maybe somewhere tropical, no family drama, no stress. But Michelle had always dreamed of having her family there for her wedding day. She wanted her father to walk her down the aisle, her mother to help her get ready, her siblings to stand beside her. How could I deny her that? So I agreed to a traditional wedding, but I made one firm decision: I would not let Todd ruin this day for Michelle. I couldn't control what he'd done at Abby's baby shower, but I could damn well control what happened at my wedding. The planning process was actually wonderful. Michelle threw herself into every detail with infectious enthusiasm. She found the perfect venue, a restored Victorian mansion with gardens that looked like something out of a fairy tale. She chose flowers that matched her grandmother's wedding bouquet. She designed a menu that honored both of our family's traditions. I focused on the logistics and the guest list. I hired the best photographer I could afford because I knew Michelle would want to remember every moment. I booked a band that specialized in the kind of music that would get everyone dancing. And I chose my groomsmen carefully, guys I trusted completely, led by my best man Jim, who'd been my closest friend since college. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Too perfectly, as it turned out. 3 weeks before the wedding, we had the bachelor party. Nothing crazy, just dinner and drinks with my closest friends. Todd was there, of course, playing the role of the loving brother. He gave a toast about how proud he was of me, how much he loved Michelle, how excited he was for our future together. But Jim, being the observant guy he is, noticed something off about Todd's behavior. He seemed nervous, fidgety, like he was hiding something. And then, as we were leaving the restaurant, Jim saw it, a receipt from Cartier that slipped out of Todd's jacket pocket. Jim grabbed the receipt before Todd could retrieve it. It was for an engagement ring. A very expensive engagement ring. Purchased just 2 days earlier. "What's this?" Jim asked, holding up the receipt. Todd's face went white. It's not what you think." "Really? Because it looks like you bought an engagement ring 2 days ago. And since Lucy's already wearing one, I'm wondering what this is for." The confrontation that followed was ugly. Todd tried to lie, claiming he was holding the ring for a friend. Then he tried to deflect, saying it was none of Jim's business. Finally, when Jim threatened to call me over, Todd broke down and admitted the truth. He was planning to propose to Lucy at my wedding reception. Not just any proposal, mind you. He'd choreographed the whole thing. He was going to wait until Michelle and I were having our first dance, then he was going to interrupt with a surprise proposal that would guarantee maximum attention and maximum disruption. Jim was furious. He called Todd every name in the book, and Todd just stood there taking it because he knew he'd been caught. Finally, Jim delivered an ultimatum. "You tell Bianca what you're planning, or I will." Todd begged Jim not to say anything. He promised he'd changed his mind, that he wasn't going to go through with it. But Jim knew better. We all knew better. Todd had never backed down from an opportunity to steal the spotlight. So Jim told me everything. The rage I felt in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just anger, it was pure, burning fury mixed with crushing disappointment. This was my brother, the person who was supposed to love and support me, and he was planning to sabotage the most important day of my life. But underneath the rage was something else, a cold, calculating determination. If Todd wanted to play games, I was going to show him what happens when you mess with the wrong person. My first move was to remove Todd from the wedding party. I called him the next morning and told him he was no longer going to be a groomsman. I didn't give him a chance to deny or explain, I just laid out the facts as Jim had presented them to me. Todd immediately went into his usual routine. He cried, he pleaded, he swore on everything holy that he wasn't planning to propose at my wedding. But I'd heard these performances too many times before. I knew exactly what he was doing. "You're lying, Todd," I said calmly. "You've been lying your whole life, and I'm done pretending I don't see it." Then came the phone calls from my parents. They were furious with me for falsely accusing Todd. They demanded I reinstate him as a groomsman. They threatened to boycott the wedding if I didn't apologize. I'd been preparing for this moment my entire adult life. I'd watched my parents enable Todd's behavior over and over again, and I'd finally reached my breaking point. "Here's what's going to happen," I told them. "Todd is no longer in the wedding party. He's still invited as a guest, but if he tries anything, and I mean anything, to disrupt my wedding, I will personally make sure he regrets it for the rest of his life." The conversation that followed was brutal. I laid out every single instance of Todd's attention-seeking behavior that I could remember. Abby's baby shower. My college graduation. The time he faked a panic attack during my sister's engagement party. The family reunion where he announced his engagement during our grandfather's birthday toast. For once, my parents couldn't argue with the evidence. They knew I was right. They'd always known, but they'd chosen to ignore it. Finally, they agreed to talk to Todd. They extracted a promise from him that he wouldn't try anything at my wedding. They presented this to me like it was some kind of victory, like Todd's promise meant anything. I wasn't satisfied, but I was out of options. Todd was going to be at the wedding whether I liked it or not. My parents had made that clear. So I decided to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Jim and I started planning. We knew Todd was going to try something. The question wasn't if, but when and how. We studied his past behavior, looking for patterns. Todd always waited for maximum impact moments, first dances, toasts, cake cutting. He never just randomly interrupted, he timed his disruptions for when they'd cause the most damage. We also knew he'd probably try to make his proposal look spontaneous, like he'd been overcome with emotion by the romance of the moment. That was Todd's signature move, manufacturing situations that made him look like the victim of his own overwhelming feelings. Jim suggested we hire security, but I had a different idea. If Todd was going to try to ruin my wedding, I wanted to be ready with a response that would not only stop him but make him regret ever messing with me. That's when I came up with the plan. I found Sarah through an actress friend of Michelle's. She was a struggling performer who specialized in improvisation, and she was perfect for what I had in mind. Sarah was about Lucy's age, attractive in a completely different way, and she had this ability to seem both vulnerable and dangerous at the same time. I hired Sarah to play the role of Todd's pregnant mistress. The plan was simple but devastating. If Todd proposed at my wedding, Sarah would immediately confront him and Lucy, claiming that she was pregnant with his baby. She'd have evidence, photos, text messages, all carefully fabricated but completely believable. Jim thought I was going too far, but I was past caring. Todd had spent his entire life getting away with selfish, destructive behavior because no one had ever made him face real consequences. I was going to change that. Michelle knew about the plan from the beginning. I wasn't going to keep secrets from my wife, especially not about something this significant. When I told her what I was planning, she was quiet for a long moment. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked. "I mean, I want him stopped too, but this could destroy his relationship with Lucy." "He's going to destroy our wedding," I replied. "If he can't respect the most important day of our lives, why should I care about his relationship?" Michelle considered this, then nodded. "You're right. If he tries anything during my father-daughter dance, I'll never forgive him. Do whatever you need to do." The wedding day arrived, and it was everything Michelle had dreamed of. The weather was perfect, the venue looked like something out of a magazine, and Michelle was absolutely radiant. For the first few hours, I actually let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, Todd was going to behave himself. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Todd sat in the third row with Lucy, looking appropriately solemn and respectful. He applauded at the right moments, smiled during the vows, and even teared up a little when Michelle and I kissed. The reception started beautifully. The cocktail hour was elegant, the dinner was delicious, and the toasts were heartfelt. Jim gave a speech that made everyone laugh and cry at the same time. My father-in-law welcomed me into their family with words that I'll treasure forever. And then came the moment I'd been dreading, Michelle's father-daughter dance. This was the moment Michelle had been looking forward to most. Her father had been battling cancer for the past year, and while he was in remission, we all knew this dance might be one of their last opportunities to share something this special. Michelle had chosen their song months in advance, My Girl by The Temptations, the same song her father used to sing to her when she was little. As they moved onto the dance floor, the entire room went quiet. It was one of those perfect moments where everyone instinctively understood that they were witnessing something sacred. Michelle was glowing, her father was beaming, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. And that's when Todd made his move. He stood up from his table, walked directly onto the dance floor, and got down on one knee right in front of Michelle and her father. He pulled out the Cartier ring and launched into a proposal speech that was clearly rehearsed and designed for maximum theatrical impact. "Lucy, my beautiful Lucy," he began, his voice carrying across the silent room, "I couldn't wait another moment to ask you to be my wife. Surrounded by all this love, all this family, I realized that I need you to be my forever." Lucy looked shocked, confused, and mortified all at once. Michelle and her father had stopped dancing and were staring at Todd in disbelief. The entire room was frozen in awkward silence. But I wasn't surprised. I'd been expecting this exact scenario. And I was ready. I caught Jim's eye and nodded. He immediately pulled out his phone and sent a text to Sarah, who was waiting in the hotel lobby. Then I casually walked over to Todd's table and did something I'd prepared for weeks in advance. I had duplicated Todd's phone earlier that day when he'd left it unattended during photos. I'd loaded it with fake text messages, fake photos, and a fake contact named Sarah with a very real phone number. Now, as Todd was finishing his proposal, I used a small device to trigger his phone to ring. The timing was perfect. Just as Lucy was staring at the ring, trying to process what was happening, Todd's phone started buzzing insistently. He tried to ignore it, but I'd programmed it to keep ringing until he answered. "Todd," Lucy said, her voice shaky, "your phone." "It's nothing," he said, still on one knee. "Lucy, will you?" That's when Sarah made her entrance. She burst through the reception hall doors looking perfectly distressed, hair slightly mussed, makeup smudged, wearing a dress that was just a little too tight and a little too revealing. She scanned the room like she was looking for someone, and then her eyes locked onto Todd. "Todd," she called out, her voice carrying across the silent room. "Todd, we need to talk." Todd went white. He looked at Sarah, then at Lucy, then back at Sarah. I don't know who this is." But Sarah was already striding across the dance floor, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood. She had tears in her eyes and her hand pressed protectively over her stomach. "Don't you dare pretend you don't know me," she said, her voice breaking. "Not after what you did. Not after what we did." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Michelle and her father had moved off the dance floor, and Michelle was staring at me with a mixture of shock and admiration. Everyone else was glued to the unfolding drama. "Todd," Sarah continued, "I'm pregnant. It's yours, and I'm keeping it. I can't do this alone anymore." Lucy dropped the ring. It hit the floor with a metallic clatter that seemed to echo through the entire room. "This is insane," Todd said, scrambling to his feet. "I don't know this woman. I've never seen her before in my life." That's when Sarah pulled out her phone. "Really?" she said. "Then why do you have my number saved as don't answer?" She dialed a number, and immediately, thanks to my earlier phone manipulation, Todd's phone started ringing. The caller ID clearly showed Sarah with a photo of her that I'd carefully planted. Todd stared at his phone like it was a snake. He couldn't answer it without talking to Sarah in front of everyone, but he couldn't ignore it because that would make him look guilty. "Answer it," Lucy said quietly. "Answer your phone, Todd." With shaking hands, Todd accepted the call. Sarah immediately started talking, and since she was standing right there, everyone could hear both sides of the conversation. "Todd, please," Sarah said into her phone while staring directly at him. "I know you're scared, but we need to figure this out. I'm 3 months pregnant, And I can't keep pretending this isn't happening. I don't know what you're talking about, Todd said into his phone, but his voice was shaking. Sarah then pulled out her trump card, the fake text messages I'd planted on Todd's phone. She started reading them aloud, and they painted a very convincing picture of a months-long affair. February 15th, you texted me, Lucy's out of town. Come over. February 18th, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. March 3rd, I know this is complicated, but I can't stay away from you. Each text message was time-stamped and detailed enough to be believable. I'd spent weeks crafting them, making sure they lined up with times when Todd had actually been away from Lucy. Lucy was crying now, staring at Todd like she'd never seen him before. Is this true? She whispered. No. Todd said desperately. I swear to you, Lucy, I have never seen this woman before in my life. Someone is setting me up. But the evidence was overwhelming. Sarah had photos on her phone, pictures of Todd that I'd pulled from his social media and carefully edited to look like intimate selfies. She had screenshots of fake conversations. She even had a fake ultrasound photo that showed a baby due in October. Todd, Lucy said, her voice barely audible, these are your text messages. On your phone. How do you explain that? Todd looked around the room desperately, searching for an ally, someone who would believe him. His eyes landed on me, and for a moment, I saw recognition flicker across his face. He knew. Somehow, he knew I was behind this. But it was too late. Lucy had already pulled off her original engagement ring and thrown it at Todd's feet. She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking with the force of her tears. I can't do this, she said. I can't. I thought I knew you. I thought we had something real. She turned and ran out of the reception hall, leaving Todd standing alone on the dance floor, surrounded by 200 stunned wedding guests. Sarah played her role perfectly. She looked at Todd with what appeared to be genuine heartbreak and said, I guess I have my answer then. I'll raise our baby alone. Then she walked out too, leaving Todd standing there with 2 engagement rings at his feet and the shocked silence of an entire wedding reception. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Todd tried to follow Lucy, but she had already gotten into her car and driven away. He tried calling her, but she wouldn't answer. He tried texting, but she'd apparently blocked his number. My parents were horrified, but they were also confused. They kept asking Todd to explain what had happened, but he couldn't. How could he explain something that didn't make sense to him either? Meanwhile, I calmly announced to my guests that the music would resume and the celebration would continue. Michelle and her father finished their dance to thunderous applause. The rest of the evening was actually wonderful. Without Todd's toxic presence, everyone was able to relax and enjoy themselves. But Todd wasn't done trying to ruin my night. He cornered me during the cake cutting, his face twisted with rage. I know it was you, he hissed. I don't know how you did it, but I know you set this up. I looked at him with the most innocent expression I could muster. I have no idea what you're talking about, Todd. I've been busy getting married. You destroyed my life, he said, his voice rising. Lucy won't talk to me. She thinks I cheated on her. She thinks I got another woman pregnant. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to propose during Michelle's father-daughter dance, I replied calmly. Todd's face went even redder. You planned this. You knew I was going to propose, and you set this whole thing up. I warned you, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I told you that if you tried anything at my wedding, you'd regret it. You chose not to listen. Todd looked like he was going to hit me, but Jim appeared at my side along with 2 of my other groomsmen. Todd might have been desperate, but he wasn't stupid enough to start a fight at my wedding. Walk away, Todd, Jim said quietly. You've done enough damage for one night. Todd looked around the room, saw that every single person was staring at him with disgust or pity, and finally left. Michelle and I went on our honeymoon the next day, 2 weeks in Italy that were absolutely perfect. We turned off our phones, ignored the outside world, and just enjoyed being married. It was everything I'd hoped our wedding would be, and more. But the phone calls and text messages were waiting for us when we got back. Todd had been frantically trying to reach me for 2 weeks. He'd called, texted, emailed, and even tried to reach me through social media. The messages started as angry demands and gradually devolved into desperate pleas. Lucy had completely cut him off. She'd thrown all his belongings out of their apartment, changed the locks, and was refusing to let him see their daughter. She'd told everyone in their social circle what had happened at the wedding, and Todd had become a pariah overnight. My parents were also calling, begging me to clear up the misunderstanding and help Todd get Lucy back. They were convinced that the whole thing was some kind of elaborate mistake, and they wanted me to explain to Lucy that Todd had never cheated on her. But I wasn't about to do that. Todd had made his choice when he decided to ruin my wedding. Now he was living with the consequences. The final text I sent to Todd was simple: "I have no idea what you're talking about." Along with it, I included a screenshot of the wedding bill and a message demanding that he reimburse me for half the cost of the reception he'd ruined. Todd never responded to that text. He couldn't. How could he admit that he'd ruined my wedding without also admitting that he'd been planning to do it all along? The fallout from that night changed everything. Lucy never took Todd back. She filed for full custody of their daughter and won. Todd's reputation was destroyed, and he eventually had to move to a different city to start over. My parents finally had to confront the truth about their youngest son. Without Lucy and their granddaughter as distractions, they couldn't ignore Todd's toxic behavior anymore. They started seeing a family therapist, and slowly, they began to understand how their enabling had created the monster that Todd had become. Abby was initially shocked by what I'd done, but eventually she came around. She admitted that she'd been secretly hoping someone would finally stand up to Todd, even if she'd never been brave enough to do it herself. As for Michelle and me, we're stronger than ever. What happened at our wedding could have been a disaster, but instead it became a testament to our partnership. Michelle saw me at my most ruthless, and she didn't flinch. She understood that sometimes, protecting the people you love requires playing hardball. Some people think I went too far. They think I should have just accepted Todd's behavior and found a way to work around it. But I disagree. Todd had spent his entire life facing zero consequences for his actions. He'd hurt people, ruined special moments, and manipulated everyone around him without ever paying a price. I gave him exactly what he deserved, a taste of his own medicine. He wanted to ruin my wedding? Fine. I ruined his engagement, his relationship, and his reputation. He wanted to make my most important day about him? I made sure his actions that night would define him for years to come. The best part is that Todd brought it all on himself. If he'd just behaved like a normal human being, none of this would have happened. But he couldn't resist the temptation to steal the spotlight one more time. And that decision cost him everything. Today, Michelle and I are happily married, planning our future together, and building a life that's completely free from toxic family drama. Todd is alone, living in a different state, working a job he hates, and probably still trying to figure out how his perfect plan went so spectacularly wrong. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty about what I did. The answer is no. Not even a little bit. Todd made his choice, and I made mine. He chose to be selfish and destructive. I chose to protect my wife and make sure he faced consequences for his actions. And honestly, it felt amazing. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to watch Todd get away with hurting people. I didn't have to smile and pretend everything was okay while he ruined someone else's special moment. I fought back, and I won. That's the thing about toxic people. They're only powerful when you let them be. The moment you decide to stop enabling their behavior and start holding them accountable, they crumble. Todd spent his whole life being the victim, playing the wounded bird, manipulating people with his sob story. But when faced with real consequences for his actions, he had no idea how to handle it. I don't regret what I did. I regret that it took me 35 years to finally stand up to him. I regret all the special moments that Todd ruined for other people while I stood by and did nothing. I regret that it took him trying to destroy my wedding for me to finally fight back. But I don't regret the fight itself. That was long overdue. Looking back, I realize that Todd's behavior at my wedding was actually a gift. It showed me who he really was, stripped away all the excuses and justifications, and forced everyone to see him clearly. It also showed me who I could be when I stopped being afraid and started protecting the people I love. Michelle and I have built a beautiful life together, one that's completely free from Todd's toxic influence. We have friends who genuinely care about us, family members who respect our boundaries, and a relationship built on mutual respect and honesty. Todd has none of those things. And that's exactly what he deserves. So what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? Have you ever had to deal with a toxic family member who just wouldn't stop? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of perfectly executed justice, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more tales of karma catching up with people who think they can get away with anything. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting even. And sometimes, getting even means making sure the person who hurt you finally faces the consequences they've been avoiding their whole life. Trust me, it's worth the wait. You've made a terrible mistake. Those were the words echoing in my mind as I stared at the village inspector who just told me I was powerless, that I could do nothing to stop the harassment of a gay couple in my jurisdiction. Little did this bureaucratic bully know, he just awakened something far more dangerous than his small-town authority could handle. What happened next turned a simple drainage complaint into the most satisfying display of government power I've ever witnessed. If you've ever felt the sweet satisfaction of watching a bully get exactly what they deserve, you're going to love this story. Hit that subscribe button because we're diving deep into a tale where justice isn't just served, it's methodically, legally, and absolutely perfectly executed. Like this video if you believe in standing up for what's right, and let's witness how one government employee turned bureaucratic red tape into the ultimate weapon of revenge. Let me paint you a picture of a Tuesday morning that started like any other in my office at the county permitting department. I handled drainage and floodplain enforcement, not the most glamorous job, but one that came with more power than most people realized. The phone rang, and on the other end was a voice tinged with frustration and genuine worry. "Sir, I need help. Every time it rains, my yard floods, and I think I know why." The caller was what I'll call nice guy, a homeowner living in the unincorporated part of our county, right next to an incorporated village. He explained that his neighbor, who lived just across the property line in the village, had been doing construction work that seemed to be directing water straight onto his property. But there was something else in his voice, a hesitation that suggested this wasn't just about drainage. As a government employee, you develop a sixth sense for when there's more to a story than meets the eye. I grabbed my clipboard, camera, and measuring tools, and drove out to investigate. The first thing I noticed was the stark contrast between the two properties. Nice Guy's yard was well maintained but clearly showed signs of recent flooding, mud stains on the house foundation, water marks on the fence, and patches of dead grass where standing water had lingered too long. Then I looked at the neighboring property in the village. This was not Nice Guy's lot, and immediately I could see the problem. The entire lot had been raised with fill dirt, creating what essentially amounted to a water slide directing every drop of rain straight toward Nice Guy's property. But that wasn't the worst part. As I was taking initial measurements, Nice Guy approached me with obvious relief in his eyes. "Thank you for coming out," he said. "I've been trying to get someone to listen for months." Then, lowering his voice, he added, "I think part of the problem is that my partner and I, well, we're a gay couple. There's been some tension with the neighbor about that." My blood pressure immediately spiked. I'd dealt with my share of property disputes, but discrimination? That raised every red flag in my professional arsenal. I maintained my composure, documented everything I could see, and assured Nice Guy that I'd be following up with the village to resolve the drainage issue. That evening, I crafted a professional letter to the village inspector, let's call him Jackwagon, explaining the drainage problem and requesting a meeting to discuss solutions. The next morning, I followed up with a phone call that would change everything. Village inspector's office, came the gruff voice on the other end. "This is calling from the county permitting department about a drainage issue between one of your village lots and an adjacent county property." What happened next still makes my jaw clench with anger. Jackwagon's tone immediately shifted to dismissive arrogance. "Look, county boy, the village can do whatever it wants with its properties. You got no jurisdiction here, and frankly, I'm not surprised it's those types of people making complaints." Those types of people. The phrase hung in the air like a toxic cloud. In that moment, Jackwagon made the critical error that would ultimately destroy him. He'd just revealed his hand. This wasn't about drainage regulations or jurisdictional authority. This was about hatred, discrimination, and the abuse of governmental power to harass a gay couple. "Is that so?" I replied, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "Well, I appreciate you clarifying the village's position. I'll be sure to document our conversation in my report." The click of hanging up the phone was like the sound of a battle gauntlet being thrown down. Jackwagon had just declared war on the wrong government employee. You see, what Jackwagon didn't understand was that federal floodplain regulations supersede local village authority. If there was a regulatory floodplain on that property, and my preliminary survey suggested there was, then I had every bit as much jurisdiction as he did, if not more. But more importantly, he'd just given me the motivation to ensure every single regulation was followed to the absolute letter of the law. I called Nice Guy that afternoon. "I want you to know I'm not letting this slide," I told him. "What's happening to you isn't just about drainage, it's about fairness, and I have the tools to make sure you get it." The next morning, I returned to the site with a full surveying kit. I was measuring elevations, documenting the fill placement, and taking detailed photographs when Not Nice Guy emerged from his house like an angry bull. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" he shouted, marching across his artificially elevated lawn. "I'm conducting a regulatory inspection of potential floodplain violations," I replied calmly, continuing my measurements. "You don't have jurisdiction here. This is village property. I'm calling the police." Here's where being a government employee with actual authority becomes beautiful. I reached for my two-way radio and keyed the MIC base. "This is unit requesting both village and county police units to my location for a regulatory dispute." The look of confusion and growing concern on Not Nice Guy's face was priceless. He'd expected me to back down, to slink away like some powerless bureaucrat. Instead, I just demonstrated that I had the full backing of law enforcement. "Since you mentioned jurisdiction," I continued, still measuring, "I should inform you that this property contains a regulatory floodplain, which falls under federal oversight. I absolutely have jurisdiction here, and I'll be exercising my authority to determine the impact of your fill activities on that floodplain." 20 minutes later, both police units arrived. I explained the situation to both officers, who were understandably annoyed at having to mediate what they initially assumed was a neighbor dispute. But when I showed them my credentials and explained the federal regulations involved, their attitudes shifted. They informed Not Nice Guy that I was operating within my legal authority and that he needed to allow me to complete my inspection. Just as I was wrapping up my initial measurements, Jackwagon arrived on scene like a discount superhero rushing to save the day. "What the hell is this harassment?" he demanded, pointing at me like I was some kind of criminal. "This is a regulatory compliance inspection," I replied, not looking up from my surveying equipment. "You're harassing a village resident. I'm calling your boss. I'm filing a complaint." I stood up and looked him directly in the eye. "I encourage you to do exactly that. When you call, make sure to reference County Code sections 15.4 through 15.7 regarding floodplain management authority. I'd be happy to wait here while you make that call." Jackwagon's face was turning an interesting shade of red. In his frustration, he stepped forward to try to physically intimidate me, but unfortunately for him, he stepped right into my marking paint. Bright orange paint splattered across his shoe and the grass. "You did that on purpose," he screamed. "Actually, that's marking chalk," I replied calmly. "It comes off quite easily. I've been using it to delineate the floodplain boundaries for my documentation. As you can see, I've marked the boundaries on all adjacent properties as well." The truth was, I had been marking boundaries everywhere, but Jackwagon's paint-covered shoe felt like a small victory in what was becoming a much larger war. Over the next week, my detailed survey revealed what I'd suspected. Not Nice Guy's property had two major federal violations. First, fill dirt had been placed within the regulatory floodplain without proper permits. Second, a garden shed had been constructed partially within that same floodplain. Both violations carried significant federal penalties and would require immediate remediation. I drafted my official report with the precision of a surgeon and the thoroughness of a tax auditor. Every measurement was documented, every regulation cited, every violation catalogued with photographic evidence. The letter I sent to both Not Nice Guy and Jackwagon was a masterpiece of bureaucratic authority. The following violations have been identified on the subject property and must be remediated within 30 days. 1. Unauthorized fill placement within the regulatory floodplain. 2. Unauthorized structure placement within the regulatory floodplain. Failure to comply will result in federal fines and potential criminal charges. But the letter didn't stop there. I also outlined the solution that would restore proper drainage to Nice Guy's property. Not Nice Guy would remove the fill and shed from the floodplain, and Nice Guy would be permitted to place fill on his own property outside the floodplain to counteract the remaining elevation difference. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone rang within hours of the letter's delivery. "This is outrageous," Jackwagon screamed into the phone. "You're abusing your power. This is harassment." "I'm enforcing federal law," I replied. "If you believe I'm acting improperly, you're welcome to file a formal complaint with my supervisor." "You bet I will. We're demanding a meeting. I'll be happy to arrange that." The meeting was set for the following week in our main conference room. When the day arrived, I walked in to find Not Nice Guy, Jackwagon, my supervisor, and myself seated around a polished wooden table. The tension was immediately palpable. Jackwagon launched into his prepared tirade about abuse of power, harassment, and jurisdictional overreach. His voice rose with each accusation, his face growing redder with each word. Not Nice Guy nodded along, occasionally interjecting his own complaints about being persecuted by the county. My supervisor listened patiently, taking notes, until Jackwagon finally ran out of steam. Then, in a calm, measured voice, my supervisor spoke. "Have you reviewed the site survey and violation documentation?" "That's not the point," Jackwagon exploded. "The point is..." "The point," my supervisor interrupted, "is that federal law has been violated on this property, and my employee has followed proper procedures in documenting and addressing those violations." The room fell silent. My supervisor continued, "The fill and structure must be removed from the floodplain. This is not negotiable. The only question is whether you'll comply voluntarily or face federal fines and potential criminal charges." Just then, our department head entered the conference room. He'd apparently heard the shouting from his office down the hall. After a brief explanation of the situation, he looked directly at Jackwagon and Not Nice Guy. "Gentlemen, you're wrong, and you're going to leave peacefully and comply with federal law, or face the consequences." The meeting was over. But the real beauty of this revenge was just beginning. Both Not Nice Guy and Nice Guy needed permits for their respective fill work. And guess who was the reviewing official for those permits? That's right, yours truly. Now, I want to be clear, I followed the letter of the law in every aspect of this process. But here's what Jackwagon and Not Nice Guy didn't understand about government work. When you're dealing with a massive caseload and limited time, you prioritize based on a variety of factors. Cooperation and civility tend to make things move faster. Hostility and discrimination tend to make things move slower. Nice Guy's permit application was a thing of beauty. He came into the office, worked with our staff, asked questions, and followed every guideline precisely. His permit was approved within days. Not Nice Guy's permit application, on the other hand, was a disaster from the start. He refused to come into the office for pre-application consultation, a free service we offered to help applicants avoid common mistakes. Instead, he submitted his application through the mail with a hostile letter about how he shouldn't have to deal with this harassment. The first application was rejected. Missing documentation, incorrect forms, inadequate site plans. All things that would have been caught and corrected if he'd simply come in for the consultation. The second application was also rejected. He'd corrected some issues but created new ones. The site plan measurements didn't match the survey, the drainage calculations were wrong, and he'd failed to include required environmental impact statements. The third application was getting closer, but still had deficiencies. At this point, he'd burned through nearly 4 months of back-and-forth correspondence. Every rejection letter I sent was meticulous, professional, and absolutely within the bounds of regulatory requirements. I wasn't being vindictive, I was being thorough. When someone approaches the permitting process with hostility and refuses to work with staff, they get exactly what they ask for: strict adherence to every regulation without any helpful guidance. Meanwhile, Nice Guy's drainage problems were resolved within weeks. He installed the field tile I'd recommended, completed his approved fill work, and sent me a thank you card that I kept in my desk drawer. The final twist came 6 months later. Not Nice Guy had finally completed his remediation work, the shed was moved, the fill was removed from the floodplain, and proper drainage was restored. But the process had cost him significantly more than it would have if he'd simply been cooperative from the beginning. I received a call from a real estate agent. Not Nice Guy was selling his house and moving out of the area. The agent wanted to confirm that all permits had been properly closed and that there were no outstanding violations on the property. All permits are in order, I confirmed. The property is in full compliance with all regulations. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but smile. Justice had been served, not through some dramatic confrontation or petty revenge, but through the methodical application of the law. The system had worked exactly as it was designed to work, protecting those who needed protection and holding accountable those who abused their authority. The real lesson here isn't about the power of government bureaucracy, it's about the power of standing up for what's right. When you encounter bullying, discrimination, or the abuse of authority, you have choices. You can ignore it, you can complain about it, or you can use whatever tools you have at your disposal to fight it. I had the tools of federal regulation and bureaucratic procedure. Others might have different tools: legal knowledge, media connections, or community organizing skills. The important thing is to use whatever power you have to protect those who can't protect themselves. So what do you think? Was this government employee justified in his methodical approach to justice, or did he go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing about your own experiences with bureaucratic revenge. If you enjoyed this story of perfectly legal payback, smash that like button and subscribe for more tales of justice served cold. And remember, the next time someone tells you that you're powerless, they might just be talking to exactly the wrong person. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight. Picture this: your bosses drive BMWs and Mercedes while paying you 25 cents over minimum wage. They live in $8 million mansions while treating you like garbage every single day. But what happens when one warehouse worker discovers their dirty little secret about wage theft? What happens when David decides to take down Goliath using nothing but labor law? Well, buckle up, because this story ends with expensive cars parked on loading docks, suits swarming the office, and me standing there watching it all burn down with a smile on my face. If you've ever fantasized about watching toxic bosses get exactly what they deserve, smash that subscribe button right now. Hit the like button because this story is about to serve up some ice-cold justice that'll make your soul sing. And stick around till the end because the final twist will have you cheering. Let's dive into how I accidentally became the architect of my boss's downfall. Let me paint you a picture of corporate hell. I worked warehouse and delivery for a retail chain, and this place was built on one simple philosophy: treat everyone below you like absolute garbage. It wasn't just toxic, it was systematically, deliberately cruel. Every level of management had learned that the way to survive was to crush the people underneath them. The managers didn't just give orders, they barked them like drill sergeants having a bad day. They'd berate you for anything they could think of. Package slightly crooked on the shelf. 20-minute lecture about attention to detail. Took 30 seconds too long on your break. Public humiliation in front of your co-workers. It was psychological warfare disguised as management. And here's the kicker: they paid us exactly 25 cents over minimum wage. 25 cents. That's what they thought our dignity was worth. Meanwhile, every morning I'd watch these same managers roll up in their shiny BMWs and Mercedes-Benzes, checking their Rolexes while they prepared to make our lives miserable for another 8 hours. The big boss. This guy lived in an $8 million mansion. 8 million. I'd drive past it sometimes just to remind myself of the obscene wealth gap we were dealing with. This man could buy a small town, but he couldn't be bothered to pay his workers a living wage. Our particular store was the freight hub for 4 others in the chain. That meant we were constantly busy, constantly stressed, and constantly dealing with drivers from the other locations. These guys would come in to load freight or drop stuff off, and over time, you get to know them. You share war stories, complain about management, bond over the shared misery of working for these people. One day, I'm sitting with two drivers from another store during a brief lull in the chaos. Let's call the main guy Buddy. He was this hard-working, soft-spoken guy who never complained about anything. But today, he looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped like he was carrying the weight of the world. "Man," Buddy says, rubbing his face, "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Me and my partner are pulling over 60 hours a week." Now, when I heard that, my first thought was, well, at least you're making bank on overtime. Because that's how it's supposed to work, right? You work more than 40 hours, you get time and a half. That's basic labor law that's been around since the 1930s. So I say to him, at least you're doing okay with all that overtime pay, right? Buddy looks at me with this confused expression. "What overtime pay?" I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean, what overtime pay? You just said you're working 60 hours a week." "Yeah, but we don't get overtime. We just get paid straight time for everything." Now, I'm no lawyer, but I know enough about labor law to know that's illegal as hell. "Did you sign an averaging agreement?" I asked, hoping maybe there was some legitimate explanation. "What's that?" he says. So I explain that an averaging agreement is something some companies use to average hours over a longer period, but it has to be signed by both parties and follow strict guidelines. Buddy shakes his head. "Never signed anything like that." "Show me your pay stub," I said. He pulls it out, and there it is in black and white, 62 hours that week, all paid at straight time. No overtime whatsoever. Not even time and a half for the 22 hours over 40. I'm looking at this stub, and my blood is starting to boil. His partner comes back from wherever he'd been, and I ask him about it too. Same story. They've been doing this for months. 60-plus-hour weeks, no overtime, just straight pay. When Buddy had asked his manager about it, he'd been told that straight pay was just the way it worked at their location. "Guys," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "this is illegal. Like, seriously illegal. You need to take this to labor relations." But they both got that look, you know the one. The look of workers who've been beaten down so much they're terrified to fight back. They were reluctant to rock the boat, figuring they'd just get fired and then have nothing. "Look," Buddy said quietly, "we need these jobs. We can't afford to make waves." I understood. I really did. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, even a terrible job is better than no job. So I dropped it, but I filed that information away in my brain. Something about it felt like a loaded gun just waiting to go off. Now, here's an important detail. At our warehouse, we never got any overtime. Not because we signed agreements or because it was legal, simply because our store wasn't busy enough to justify it. The warehouse was constantly slammed, but the actual retail store was dead most of the time. So we worked our 40 hours and went home. I didn't have skin in the overtime game personally, but injustice is injustice, and this was eating at me. A couple months passed, and I kept seeing Buddy and his partner when they'd come through. They looked more exhausted each time. The company was literally stealing from them, and they were just taking it because they felt powerless. Then one day, they're in again, and Buddy's partner has news. "My girlfriend and I are moving back east," he tells us. "I'm giving my notice next week." This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "Dude," I said, "you literally have nothing to lose now. File that complaint about the overtime. You're leaving anyway, what can they do to you?" Something in his face changed. Maybe it was the realization that he was about to be free from this place, or maybe it was months of suppressed anger finally bubbling to the surface. "You know what," he said. "You're right. I'm going to do it." And he did. He filed a complaint with labor relations about the systematic wage theft that had been going on for months. Now, here's where the story gets really good. A few weeks go by, and I'm coming into work one morning like any other day. But something's different. There are expensive cars parked all along our loading dock. And I'm not talking about the usual manager BMWs, I'm talking about serious executive-level vehicles. Black sedans, high-end SUVs, the kind of cars that scream corporate crisis management. My workmate, who'd been there longer than me, takes one look at this automotive parade and says, "Something big is going down." All the managers from all the stores had been summoned. Every single one of them was inside our building with what looked like a small army of people in expensive suits. You could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. We decided to investigate. Our store had this second floor where the administrative offices were, and the company bookkeeper had his office up there. This guy, let's call him Mr. Chen, was a Chinese immigrant who'd been handling all the payroll for the entire chain. He was this quiet, polite guy who always said good morning and never caused any trouble. As we got closer to the offices, we could hear raised voices. The bosses were in full damage control mode, and they'd found their scapegoat, Mr. Chen. "He doesn't speak English very well," one of the managers was saying loudly. "Obviously, he just screwed everything up. It's a language barrier issue." Now, it was true that Mr. Chen spoke with an accent and sometimes struggled with complex English. But he was a qualified bookkeeper who'd been doing this job for years. The idea that he'd just accidentally been paying people wrong was ridiculous. But here's what the bosses didn't know: Mr. Chen was way smarter than they gave him credit for. As they're trying to throw him under the bus, he calmly reaches into his filing cabinet and starts pulling out documents. "Here," he says in his careful English, "here are emails where I tell you this is illegal. Here are my questions about overtime pay. Here are your responses telling me to just do what you say." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Mr. Chen had been keeping records of everything. Every email, every instruction, every time he'd raised concerns about the legality of what they were asking him to do, he had it all documented. "You tell me many times to shut up and do job," he continued, his voice getting stronger. "I tell you this is wrong. You say do it anyway. Here is proof." And with that, he handed over a thick folder of evidence and submitted his resignation on the spot. The man walked out of there with his dignity intact while the bosses were left holding the bag. The labor relations investigation moved fast after that. When you have documented evidence of systematic wage theft, there's not much wiggle room for excuses. The government doesn't mess around with labor law violations, especially when they're this blatant and widespread. A few weeks later, I see Buddy again. He's got a new partner now, and he's practically glowing. "Dude," he says, "you're not going to believe this." He pulls out a pay stub, and my jaw drops. It's for about 15 paychecks worth of earnings, all the back overtime they owed him, plus penalties and interest. But that was just the beginning. The company got hit with a massive fine on top of having to pay all the back wages. When you systematically steal from your workers, the government makes sure it hurts. The investigation had revealed that this wasn't just happening at one store, it was company policy across multiple locations. Now, here's my favorite part of this whole story. Remember how I mentioned all those expensive cars parked on the loading dock? Well, the second-in-command, this arrogant guy who'd made my life hell for months, had driven his silver BMW right up onto the loading dock like he owned the place. While he was inside dealing with the crisis he'd helped create, he drove over a nail. When he came out hours later, looking like he'd aged 10 years, he found his precious BMW with a flat tire. He opens his trunk, sees the spare tire and jack, and calls me over. "Change that for me," he says. Not asks, orders. Like I'm his personal servant. I looked at him, looked at the flat tire, and smiled. "Sorry, that's not my job," I said. "And if I hurt myself doing something outside my job description, my workers' compensation claim would be denied." The look on his face was priceless. Here was a guy who'd spent years barking orders and treating people like garbage, and suddenly he was powerless. He had to call a tow truck and wait like everyone else. As he went inside to make that call, I stood on the loading dock and took in the scene. Expensive cars everywhere, executives in crisis mode, lawyers scrambling to contain the damage, all because one worker decided to stand up for what was right. The aftermath was beautiful to watch. The company ended up paying out hundreds of thousands in back wages, penalties, and legal fees. Several managers got fired, including the one who'd been so insistent that straight pay was just the way it worked. The labor relations investigation led to a complete overhaul of their payroll practices. But the real victory wasn't the money or the firings. It was watching these bullies realize that their system of fear and intimidation had limits. That their workers weren't as powerless as they thought. That treating people like garbage has consequences. Mr. Chen, the bookkeeper they tried to scapegoat, became something of a legend. Word spread through the entire chain about how he'd taken down the bosses with nothing but careful documentation and quiet dignity. He found a better job within a month, and I heard he got a significant raise. As for me, I stood on that loading dock, watching the chaos unfold, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the sweet, intoxicating taste of justice. Not revenge exactly, but something better, the knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. This story taught me that power isn't always about the size of your house or the price of your car. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply know your rights and help others know theirs. One conversation, one complaint, one person willing to stand up, that's all it took to bring down an entire system of exploitation. If this story of workplace justice gave you chills, smash that like button and subscribe for more tales of toxic bosses getting exactly what they deserve. Drop a comment and tell me about the most satisfying moment of workplace revenge you've ever witnessed or experienced. And if you're dealing with wage theft or any other labor violations, don't stay silent, know your rights and use them. Sometimes the system works, but only if we're brave enough to make it work. I'll see you in the next story, where justice is always served ice cold.